Great. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I'm seeing 6 o'clock Eastern, but I guess we can go ahead and get started.
Sounds
We'll
great.
start off with some introductions and then we'll get into the meat of the presentation. New York, that's where I am. Great. All right. Well, welcome everyone to Real-Time Rapid Response, Digital Organizing During Breaking News. This presentation is brought to you by myself. My name is Nick. I'm from Whole Whale, and Sterling as well. And we'll go ahead and introduce ourselves. So like I said, my name is Nick, and I am a senior strategist with agency Whole Whale. Whole Whale is a digital agency that works with nonprofits and social change organizations to hone digital strategy, whether it's fundraising or marketing or advertising. And Sterling, I'll pass it to you.
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. My name is Sterling Howard. I'm the Vice President of Development and Communications at Lawyers for Good Government. I had the opportunity to work with Whole Whale, and I can sing their praises last year, or earlier this year, I guess, and a little bit of the end of last year. Really great, fantastic agency, and really excited to present to you today. If you want to go to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit more about Lawyers for Good Government. So we are a community of 125,000 lawyers and advocates. We seek equality under the law. And the way that we do that is by mobilizing thousands of lawyers in large-scale pro bono programs to build the equity that we seek. So we're going to talk a lot about how we engage with volunteers and lawyers, especially around rapid response news events today, and excited to tell you more about our work.
Sure. Thanks for that, Sterling. And I can quickly just say a little bit more about Whole Whale. We are a B Corp digital agency, and with us, the name of the game is using data to leverage impact. So we're really excited to be here at Netroots alongside Lawyers for Good Government. It's such an amazing community of incredible activists and campaigners here. So we're really pleased to be presenting. But with introductions out of the way, we can now dive into it. So today, to start, our table of contents here is, we're done with introduction, but we're going to go through what it looks like to create a comprehensive digital rapid response campaign. So the way we've structured this presentation is to take you all through each component of creating a rapid response plan. First, we'll start with talking about what you can do before the event, how you can plan to maximize impact before any current event or any kind of breaking news pushes your organization to the forefront, what you can do ahead of time to plan. Then we'll go into immediate response, what to do in the moment when all eyes are on you, your organization, or your cause. Then we'll turn to activation, which is how we can turn attention into impact, how we can translate eyes and ears into dollars or volunteers or real change for the cause that you're promoting. And then we'll take a look at, after the event, how to make sense of all the data and strategies you've tried, how to kind of do a post-mortem and understand how you can do even better the next time a breaking news event propels your organization to the forefront. So what we hope to accomplish today is learn how to build, engage, and expand a digital community. So some of us might be activists working just ourselves, pushing a cause forward. Maybe some of us are working with larger organizations with dedicated comms and marketing teams. Whatever size organization or platform you're on, there's going to be something for you here today about building and expanding that community during breaking news. Our philosophy centers around leveraging rapid response around movement building. right? So today we're going to focus on how, when that heightened awareness and attention comes to your organization, how you can use it to build genuine momentum, right? That attention, it's not going to last long. It's what you do with it in the moment that can make or break your movement going forward. So we'll talk a lot about that. Another thing that I'm especially excited to go over with you all today is generating real world impact through digital marketing and digital communication. Lawyers, they are experts at this. So I'm super excited for Sterling to share with you so many wonderful examples of how they were able to do this. And then lastly, we'll focus on keeping users engaged in the long run with tangible action-based asks. So what to do when the dust settles, Trump is out of office and suddenly people are maybe a little less interested. How do you keep the momentum going? We'll talk about all of these things. So when we think of rapid response, whatever you want to call it, real-time rapid response, responding to breaking news, it's important to break it down in a time-based way. We'll start, and this is how the rest of the presentation will be structured. First, we'll start with what happens before, what you can do before this event occurs. None of us could have planned for what happened on January 6th, but we could definitely plan what happened in November for an election. We say that luck equals opportunity and preparation. So we'll go over what you can do before to make sure everything's in place for when this big tentpole event happens, you're ready to go. We'll also understand how you can funnel awareness into action. And maybe this sounds like marketing lingo because it is, but it's real. It's what we want to do is when everyone's looking at your organization and seeing you on Twitter, how do you activate those people who were just loosely aware of your organization? How do you get them to take meaningful, impactful steps to help build a movement? We'll talk about how to nurture those people into really engaged supporters. Then we'll turn to immediate response, where we'll focus on what to do in the moment. So the event is happening. How do you respond? What do you do? What do you say? What's your plan of attack? That's during an event, the immediate response. And then activation. This is more of, okay, the dust has settled. The Capitol is no longer on fire, but what comes next? That's up for you to decide. So we'll talk about that. And then lastly, when it comes to summarizing what has happened, we'll talk about turning all the data and tactics you've used into real, clear kind of things that you can improve on for next time to build momentum even stronger. So we like to say that moments of heightened public engagement are only useful if your digital strategy is designed to nurture. You can't just go to your supporters saying, we need you to donate a ton of money right now. Maybe that'll work. There's a lot of emotion, it might work.
Nope.
We saw it work. But Sterling's saying, nope. Yes, we have to nurture. We have to build those supporters. We have to turn them into supporters. I apologize for the noise. I live near a fire station. But
it's the world we live in.
The world we live in, yes. Another thing that we like to talk about at Whole Whale is bridging the gap between outputs and outcomes. So if you all work in the nonprofit space, which I'm assuming some of you do, maybe work at a C3, you probably hear about this a lot, especially, but this is something that is really important, is understanding how what you do turns into what you impact. So whether you're sending out press releases or emails or petitions, whatever you're making, whatever the stuff you're making and investing time into, being able to translate that into real world outcomes is super important. So we'll walk through how you can make that, how you can bridge that divide and make it tangible, make what you do lead to real world tangible impact that you can then take back and say, hey, we did this real thing. Great. So how do we plan and strategize? So this first part is going to be more of me talking about some of the theory and strategizing, and Sterling's also going to jump in, and then especially kind of in the later sections, Sterling will talk about a lot of kind of real world applications and examples of what this looks like. But before the event, before any breaking news happens, there are things that you and your organization should be doing right now to prepare. So preparing for events before they happen. Again, we hit on this, saying luck is equal to opportunity and preparation. So one of the things we can do is prepare for events by staying on top of news within your organization's expertise. You all work on specific causes, specific issues, specific verticals. It's really important to stay up to date on that. Sterling, I imagine you all spend a ton of time monitoring the news.
We do. We have a Slack channel for staff to be able to share media articles that are of interest or adjacent to our issues. And then we obviously also set up Google alerts for like our biggest tentpole issues, so that's specifically for communication staff, so that they're receiving that and seeing what's in the news, what's happening, what's relevant to our issues. So yeah, it's really helpful.
Great. Yeah, that sounds like a really smart idea, especially when things move so quickly. Coming to that, though, there are also key events, tentpole events that we know when they're going to happen. So,
Definitely.
Sterling, you all work in the legal community. Like, what does this look like?
Yeah, so a big example is, we historically have done a lot of organizing around Supreme Court nomination fights and Supreme Court vacancies. So, that's not something you can plan for, is a retirement or a death of a Supreme Court justice. But what you can do is you can, when the kind of act happens that's going to create the vacancy, that's when you can go into full-blown mode, right? For example, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, we knew as a community, that we were very likely to not be interested or want to support whoever Trump nominated to replace her. And we didn't know who that would be, but what we did know that we could do is prepare what are our key values, what are we looking for in a Supreme Court justice, what are some of the types of decisions we'll be looking for once somebody is announced, so that we can immediately shift to organizing in favor or in opposition of a candidate, right? So that's one example. In the legal community, the other things we look for is Supreme Court cases, of course, Judiciary Committee, Senate Judiciary Committee hearings are usually really important for the work that we do. The other thing that's really important is immigration policies. We do a lot of work on direct assistance to asylum seekers on our southern border. And, it's pretty clear based off of kind of different working policies, whether something is going to stay or something's going to change. An example is, the Biden administration decided to wind down the migrant protection policy program, which was the Remain in Mexico program that forced asylum seekers to wait in Mexico for their turn at an asylum hearing. When he did that, that was then challenged in court. It's currently going through a bunch of lawsuits. But right now, the Biden administration has been told that it must reactivate that program. And so we can plan, they haven't yet, right? But we can plan for when that happens and how do we mobilize when it does happen. So there's just a couple of examples.
Yeah, I think that those are great ones. And I'm sure that the folks joining us on the chat can probably think of events within their issue vertical or their cause that they can think of, events that you kind of can plan for in a way. When it comes to like rapid response, another thing we like to think of is planning that response around who you perceive as the most engaged with your organization. So at Whole Whale, we like to think of the 50 most engaged supporters, or whatever that looks like for your organization, the top 10% of supporters or something. A strategy we like to recommend is thinking of those people, the people most likely to do the thing you want them to do, forming a rapid response strategy around them. And I know, Sterling, this is something that you've all been kind of tinkering with as well, right?
Yeah. We believe wholeheartedly in the same strategy that, just because we have 120,000 plus people in a Facebook group, which I'll talk about later, doesn't mean that we can ever expect all 120,000 of them to do any of the actions that we create to make an impact on something. But what we can do is think really critically about what are the indicators of somebody who's a super supporter. For us, we call them VIPs. And for our organization, an indicator of a VIP is somebody with a monthly donation active, somebody who has been a pro bono legal volunteer in one of our programs in the last year, somebody that has fundraised on our behalf, like on a peer-to-peer function. Those are super supporters, and those are people that when we're thinking critically about what sort of actions we want people to take, the most engaged actions are really created for them.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think so. These are, in terms of preparing, I think these are kind of three of the things we focus on and what you can do beforehand. But another thing that you can do to prepare is really try to visualize how you're able to turn attention into action. So this is a tool, a conceptual framework that we use at Whole Whale, called the aware to care cycle. We didn't come up with this also, by the way. But the idea is that you have people who are aware. They are familiar with your organization, your mission, your brand. And the idea is to slowly convince them to become those super supporters, the people who do the things that are most valuable to your organization. So when people are attentive but not super engaged, maybe they're seeing you on social media, they're in a Facebook group, we'll talk more about that. They're coming to your website if you have one, maybe kind of randomly. They read an article, they looked up your organization, and somehow stumbled across you. These are people who are generally aware, right? Those people are great. You want as many of those people as possible, and they're nice to have, but they're only, in some ways, only as useful as they are for their ability to now become a little bit more engaged, right? So we want to nurture them up the ladder, which is the number 2 here. How do we get them to be not just aware, but ready to take a little bit more meaningful action with our organization? So maybe you use email capture. You have a website and you have a sign up for our emails here. Perfect. Maybe you have petitions. You're organizing a cause, and whether your petition's on your website or it's on a change.org or a moveon.org, whatever it may be, maybe you're bringing them into the fold a little bit more meaningfully. Or you're running a contact your legislator, contact your representative about this bill that we need to pass through the floor. Inviting them to take more meaningful action helps you bring them in a little bit closer to your organization. Another thing here is text signups. We'll talk more about this, but I know that lawyers has really, really good engagement with their text community. That's right, Sterling?
Yep, indeed. Yeah, we're seeing some really exciting numbers and engagement on using a text platform.
Awesome. Yeah. So that's kind of the perfect example, right? Of just being a little bit more engaged, right? And
Yep.
then when this moment happens, this breaking news happens, or even just in general, you want to move these people from a little bit more engaged to very engaged. What's the most important thing you can get your diehard supporters to do? Is it to donate? Is it to volunteer? Is it to fundraise on your behalf? Whatever it is, always want to be trying to nurture people towards that, pushing them gently, or maybe not so gently, and maybe a little bit more urgently towards that moment.
And it may be more than one of those at the same time, which we'll also talk about.
Exactly. Yes. There are many different ways to kind of visualize and break this down, but for sure. Um, this is a visualization of essentially the same thing, just instead of a circle, it's now a pyramid. And it's a little bit more clear. But what we like to do is get people from broadly aware. People we say are at the top of the funnel, right? They're broadly aware. They kind of know what you're about. We want them to become more and more engaged. We want to increase their buy-in to your organization. Engaging, signing up for your text community or a petition or doing some other web action. And then we want to push those people down even further into taking a super meaningful action, whether it's phone banking or volunteering or fundraising or donating, that kind of thing. And then at the end of the day, the name of the game is, right, we give so much to this, so many outputs, so much work, and it's all about driving impact at the bottom, right? So that's our end goal. So we'll walk through this, and I promise it'll get less conceptual. But the idea is that this is all things that you can plan for, and that mapping this out can be really, really important to forming a cohesive rapid response strategy. This is something that Whole Whale walks through with every single one of the organizations we work with. Is we go through this and write down what happens at each of these levels, and it really helps ground not only just a rapid response strategy, but a whole digital strategy. So when we talk about awareness, these are people, as we said, kind of loosely involved, loosely engaged. Maybe they're organic social. Maybe they're coming in through advertising. They saw you in a press release. But Sterling, maybe you can talk about the really awesome and unique way that you kind of got a lot of your supporters to first engage with you.
Yeah, so Lawyers for Good Government has a really interesting origin story. We were the definition of an overnight Facebook sensation. So after Donald Trump, of course, won the election in 2016, our founder, whose name is Tracy Fight Love, she was, like a lot of people who were upset at the results, just scrolling through Facebook that night. And she was reading a bunch of personal narratives from people she knew in the legal community that she went to law school with at Harvard, or that, you know, had been an attorney with her at a law firm. And all of these, you know, everyone was talking about, there was all this dread. They had ideas about how to oppose the next president. And she specifically noticed that lawyers had really important things that were getting ignored in the kind of flood of rage and fear and all this messaging. They had really good concrete suggestions on how to fight for human rights and equal justice against this sort of, you know, administration. But their thoughts and their suggestions and their feedback, it was getting lost, right? That night was such a crazy night for so many people and emotional. And so her solution was, she's like, I'm just going to make a private Facebook group for a couple of my friends. And all of these anti-Trump lawyers can get together, can trade advice, can invite a few friends, maybe post, you know, about what they think we should be doing to organize. And so she, you know, she invited a couple of people, created this group. It was originally called Lawyers of the Left. And she made it a public Facebook group. She figured she'd get maybe 150 or 200 members. And instead, the group attracted 60,000 members in its first 72 hours of existence and had 100,000 after 1 week, leveling off at around over 120 for quite a while. And so to Tracy and all the people in the group, it was very clear that this was going to be more than a Facebook group. It was, creating a legal army. And since that time, we've now created an organization. We've built, dozens of large-scale pro bono programs to engage all of these attorneys in really important human rights and equal justice work. And since that time, Facebook has remained just really core to who we are and how we acquire supporters, but also how we engage with them, particularly during rapid response moments, which of course we'll continue to discuss. So that is kind of, my 2-second aside on how we came to be, why Facebook in particular is really important to us. I'm also going to talk a little bit later about what we're doing to plan for a world without Facebook, or maybe trying other platforms other than Facebook. I think everyone here is aware that it is a necessary tool, but unfortunately probably not a tool for good long term. So what can we do about that as well?
Yeah, that's great. That's phenomenal.
It was awesome. I mean, it's like I have a job now because some person posted on Facebook, and it created an organization with a budget and staff of 10, and doing really, really amazing work. So it's really cool to see 5 years later where we are.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. And to the comment, we'll talk a little bit about Facebook alternatives. I know Sterling is there. You all are trying out something on the side. Exactly. So yes, we'll bring that up for sure. Great. Yeah. So the name of the game, though, right, is once you have all those people in the Facebook group, you also want to start to levy all the different channels at your disposal. So another key to developing a comprehensive digital strategy is you got to be everywhere, right? So as many social channels as you can manage is what we recommend. Even if you don't have a ton of success with one, just being on it adds a level of legitimacy and authenticity to your work and your advocacy. If you're fortunate enough to have a dedicated website, publishing content can help improve your search visibility. So people who just randomly search for you, stumble across you, that's the dream, right? This is a brand new person you can bring in. And then levying your relationships, networks, or partnerships. Other organizations within your network that you can partner with to get, new people involved with your cause can be super important.
Yeah, and I'll chime in there on 2 points. The first is, partnering with other organizations, especially in kind of crisis moments or rapid response moments, while it's really hard to negotiate or to figure out in the moment, it can be well worth it. And an example is that our Amy Coney Barrett kind of opposition work, which we're going to talk a little bit more about at one point, but it was the largest ever attorney sign-on letter in opposition to a Supreme Court nominee. And we did that in partnership with Alliance for Justice. And that was a really awesome way to get our name in front of Alliance for Justice supporters and vice versa, right? So really great way to it was hard. I'm not going to say it was easy, right? Because it's movement, rapid response, lots of, emailing and calling of somebody else in your counterpart at the organization to confirm and all of that, but it's well worth it. The other thing in terms of leveraging relationships, especially about getting your name out, a really, really easy way to do this is by joining coalitions. So a lot of time, there are amazing coalitions that are aligned with what you're already doing. And their job is to basically aggregate the voices of a bunch of individual organizations. So an example of this is Welcome with Dignity, which is a fantastic organization that is organizing around immigration issues, particularly those at the southern border with regard to asylum seekers and deportations and all of that. And what I find so great about them, and there's other coalitions that do the exact same thing, but something happens in the press They send an email to everyone who's a member. They say, do you want to submit a statement? You submit a couple of sentences, and then they release a press release that has everyone's aggregated press statements. There are a lot of coalitions that do that work. And it's just a really easy way for like very low effort, your organization to get your name associated with other organizations that are working on your issue. So that's definitely something to think about if you don't have a ton of dedicated comms resources. Look for other people doing the work, and in particular, see if there are other coalitions that are uplifting the work kind of in a more comm-centric focus, and piggyback on their efforts.
That's a great piece of advice. I definitely agree with that. And once you get those people in, I know that previous coalitions were getting new people to your website.
Yep.
So it's important when you think about forming kind of a digital architecture for how people interact with you. This is 10 other wonderful Netroots sessions rolled into one slide, but just thinking about all these different tools and how they interact with each other is super important and something you can do beforehand. And if the key action for your supporters to take is a petition, it's a contact your legislator, it's a donation, make sure that you're constantly using all the tools at your disposal to push them towards that. Social media, email, your website. You want it to be cohesive, or text as well. So this is just to show, yes, you have to kind of to do it all. You want to meet people where they're at.
Yep.
And
also, use the data that you learn from your different channels to then, tailor future outreach. We at Lawyers for Government, as Nick mentioned, have found that our text community that we're in the process, that we're always trying to build, just like an email community, you're always trying to acquire more onto your list. We're doing the same with a text community. And we have found really, really amazing, click-through rates and engagements and all of that. I mean, I'm talking 50% plus click-throughs, which is just an insane rate. And depending on what the ask is. And so we actually kind of tend to go there first a lot of times. We just released a new policy report yesterday from our Lawyers for Racial Justice initiative, and we sent it out first to the text group because we wanted to kind of see, what is their reaction. They're it's almost like they're our VIP people, right? And let's so yes, multi-channel, but also think about, which ones and in what order, and which ones are you going to prioritize if you do have limited resources. You can't do everything all the time if you're a cash-strapped organization like most of us are at. So prioritize based off of what the data says, right? Where the people, what channels are the most impactful for your organization.
Yeah, that's a great additional perspective for sure. Yeah, moving along though, talking about text community, it's all about bringing people into the fold. So as we think about driving engagement, so just away from just being aware to more meaningfully engaged, we want to engage them across channels. So things we've already mentioned, email capture or petitions, text signups, contact your legislator. These can all be really important tools. And I know what you're thinking petitions are very 2008 or something like that. And they can be, but there's ways to make them where they drive real impact. And also, it can be really valuable to, leading to future impact as well. Even if you're just using these tools as a lead generation tactic, that can be a really important stepping stone for your organization to when the critical must act, super important ask comes, you're able to build this community, nurture this community. So when that ask comes, you can ask those people to take that action with you, right? So these are all just part of building that, nurturing those folks. And when it comes to turning social followers into supporters, you can do this as well, right? So you're on social media. Social media is great, but Twitter is great. There are a lot of specific ways to use Twitter for advocacy, but for some organizations, they really need them in their own ecosystem, right? Not just kind of, people on Twitter, but people you are, you can contact at a moment's notice. So Lawyers for Government is really good at translating people from social media into actively engage in their networks. So maybe Sterling, you can talk about like this tweet and how you do that.
Yeah. So this tweet is actually from one of our board members. We have a board member who is really engaged and also happens to be really good at Twitter, meaning that he has a pretty significant following. I think it's something like 30 or 40,000 people. And he, every social media channel has its own kind of ecosystem. All of them, though, that tip at the bottom is really important, that you need to make the asks themselves urgent, time bound, and specific. But on Twitter, you got to be pithy. You got to be, repetition, having like the separate lines is really important. How it looks as a tweet is really important. So, he's really good, and we lean into that, right? Of kind of letting him lead the way on our Twitter efforts. Similar, by contrast, our founder, Tracy, as probably you can tell by the fact that she created this organization out of a Facebook post. She's fantastic at Facebook engagement and turning people into supporters based off of Facebook posts. She's really good at the narrative and making it really just emotionally evocative in a short span of time, and centering the narrative on personal stories, which we'll talk more about the importance of that. So lean into that, but it's a great place to get people engaged, and it's a great place to market the opportunities for action that you do have, especially obviously in rapid response moments.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this is a great example. And moving on to action. So as you move from, just aware, in that case, that, that petition there, moving into action and getting people to take those high value actions with you can be hard, but it's important to think about how you're going to make that ask. So this is an example of pushing supporters to action. And here, certainly you can talk about this as well, but
Sure.
You guys used your text community to
Yep.
full advantage. You have 2 asks here. Maybe you can tell us about this.
Yeah, sure. So this is a screenshot of a text that comes from our text platform. The platform we use is called Community, though I think we're transitioning soon for other reasons, but it has served our purpose very well for kind of building an initial list. And what's really great about it is the texts come from Tracy, our founder and executive director herself, meaning people, it's like they're interacting with Tracy. And so that gives a really nice personal touch when you're doing text, as I'm sure there's been a bazillion sessions at Netroots about. But this particular situation was a situation where we were launching a new program. And a lot of times when we're launching a new program, we like to let our supporters kind of behind the curtain a little bit, even if it's not real. And we like to make it seem like they're building the program with us. Meaning, like, a lot of times, we'll first put out, even though we've already decided that the need is evident, we need to do something about something, right? We need to create a program. We need to mobilize attorneys. We need to do something about an issue. In this case, it's asylum seekers that were our clients on the southern border. Were coming to us after they had been admitted into the US, and they were saying, we asked them, what do you need next? Right. And they said, we need work permits. Like, we don't know how long we're going to be allowed to stay in the US while we wait for our backlogged immigration case. But in the meantime, we have to provide for our families. Can you help us, secure work permits? We're like, yes, we can definitely do that. Right. So we already knew we were going to be doing this, but we kind of made it seem like we needed help background. So even before this text, we, sent out teasers to our community saying, hey, we've heard about this need. We don't know whether or not we can build it though. We need to know, can you step up? Will you be willing to take a case? Will you be willing to fundraise for it? Will you be willing to donate to make it happen? And then you have a list, whether it's on Facebook or text or however you asked people that question, of initial supporters to go to when you actually are ready to launch. So this is an example of, right, like it says, I've been working with our team over the past 7 weeks. We've been putting together this huge project that's going to help thousands of asylum seekers in the US get their work permits. And we made it clear, we're not just looking for help in the project, right? Like being a volunteer, but we also need help raising money to make it a reality. And that's another kind of behind the curtain aspect of, like, we can't do it without financial support too. But this is also a great example of, there are 2 ways that you could get involved. You don't have to do both. If you're an attorney, you can volunteer. If you're not an attorney, you can fundraise, or you can do both, right? Like there's lots of different ways. So we try to meet people where they're at with our asks. And it seems to work pretty well. This had a really great response. We've had, hundreds of pro bono attorneys sign up, and we've already, helped hundreds of asylum seekers in the past, I think, 5 weeks that the program has been launched. So it's really exciting.
That's really exciting to hear. And I love the kind of the double ask thing, because there's something there for everyone. And if someone feels like they can't do one ask for, they don't have the time or something, there's something else for them to do. So not only is it 2 different audiences, but it gives people 2 different options based on what they're able to contribute.
Exactly.
Great. All right. And then another thing that you guys do really well is you do give similar opportunities just on your website directly. So this is a screenshot from the Lawyers for Good Government website. And what it is it's similar asks of differing layers of difficulty or involvement to give people, different means to contribute.
Yep. And the other thing I'll just mention here is, we're in a probably unique situation because we're mobilizing attorneys, which is like a very specific thing. But I think this translates elsewhere, this is a good example of, we have 2 opportunities for lawyers to engage, right? Two different ways for them to volunteer. The one that's kind of in the middle of your screen that says volunteer with Project Corazon work permits is that project I was just describing. And that one is actually a super discreet, like it takes 5 hours of volunteer time. You don't need to have any sort of experience in immigration law. You don't need to be a Spanish speaker, right? Like it's a really, like, you could have graduated from law school 10 years ago and not thought about like a courtroom ever since, but you can still, we try to make it as easy as possible. You can still volunteer. Whereas the third one at the bottom is like a much more robust, right? You need immigration attorneys or experience with immigration. We need Spanish speakers, right? And so I just mentioned that because it's really good to diversify your options for engagement and the types of actions people can take, presenting this menu of opportunities, basically.
Absolutely. That menu of opportunities, that's
different
great.
Ways to get engaged.
Yes. Love it. Great. And then, of course, all of this is because we're trying to drive results in the real world. We're trying to make real world impact. So Sterling, maybe you can just tell us about one of the wins you had and you kind of use this to further mobilize your community.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite stories. So this little girl is a picture of Sonia. Sonia was 7 years old at the time. We met her. She was an asylum seeker. She had a serious colon issue, and we met her in December 2019. She was stuck in the border camp in Matamoros, Mexico, and she had no access to clean, hygienic conditions because she was living in this horrible refugee camp. And the volunteer doctors at the camp warned that because of her condition, she would likely become septic and die. So she had actually developed the condition, which is called a fistula, it's basically an opening between her intestines and the skin. And so it just creates really bad infections and sepsis. She had developed this condition while she and her mother were in ICE detention. So they had presented themselves at the border asking for asylum. They were detained by ICE for a few days. This is how the border used to work. It works completely differently now. They were detained for a few days while, Customs and Border Patrol decided what to do with them. And even though she had this medical condition that she developed those few days, they were released back into Matamoros, Mexico to wait for their immigration, their asylum hearing. So this was the Remain in Mexico program. That's where our attorneys that were on the ground met Sonia and her mother. And what they did is CBP actually has guidelines that state if you're super medically vulnerable, then you don't have to stay in Mexico while you're waiting for your asylum hearing. You can be admitted to the US. You can go into the US immigration system that way. You still have to do all the same stuff. You still have to go through your asylum hearing, but you can do it where you can get medical attention, not, a squalid, horrible refugee camp. So our attorneys kept going to CBP with Sonia and her mother, and they kept saying, look what's happening. Here's our letters from the doctors. Here's what's, she's going to die. Like, she will die if she continues living here. And CBP kept saying, sorry, there's nothing we can do about it. And so this was a moment where our attorneys realized they had done all the legal advocacy they could do. And they decided, let's turn to our community and let's see if they can have an impact. So we actually put the call out on Facebook to all of our members in that huge Facebook group that I mentioned, over 120,000 people. And we gave them the number of Customs and Border Patrol in Brownsville. And we told them to call this number and say, why aren't you following your own procedures with regard to this little girl? Call the representatives to demand the same thing. See if anyone could talk to the media about covering the story. There started to be a little bit of media coverage at this point. We just said, let's put it out there and see what happens. It was a situation where we didn't have anything else to lose. That's kind of rare, by the way, in legal advocacy, but because a lot of times you want to stay in at least somewhat good rapport with the other side. But this was not one of those situations. This was Trump's CBP. So we were like, no, it's, we'll try anything. And the response was overwhelming. We had hundreds of likes and comments on the posts. We don't know how many people called because this was all so last minute. And we're just putting it out on Facebook and trying anything possible. But we do know that within 2 hours, CBP actually called the attorneys and said, okay, bring her. We'll get them processed. We'll get them through. And so it was a huge win. Sonia and her mom, it was right before Christmas. It got covered in the press. That's what the story is. That they were admitted into the US. She got life-saving treatment, and she's still awaiting her asylum hearing in the US now. But it was such an amazing story because it really showed, right, if we hadn't have taken all of the time to develop that pipeline of support that we've been talking about, then in that moment, we were able to use them to create real world impact, to literally save a 7-year-old's life, right? And we, of course, followed up with our community about what happened. We centered them in the narrative, right? Like, you did this, you made this happen, right? Because we want the people who called that day, and even if they didn't get through, even if they just left a message, we want them to think back on that they did something, right? And remember what that felt like, and come back to that in the future when they see a request from us or an appeal from us or a petition or whatever it is. So really, really proud that our advocacy kind of, translated to real world impact in this media moment, in a rapid response moment, kind of all together.
Yeah, what a powerful example there. But I think it kind of speaks to the importance of being able to nurture this community. So when the time comes,
Right.
you don't have, you can't pound the alarm that many times, but when you're ready to ring that alarm, people can mobilize.
That's exactly right. And we are really judicious about when we have those kind of all hands on deck moments. We don't do it often on purpose for exactly the reason that you just said.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing, and I'll let you share what you all, how you were all responding to another
Sure.
breaking news moment. So now that we're done preparing, right? So all those things that we talked about, the thinking about how do we move our supporters from aware to engaged to taking action, that should all be happening before. Figuring out that structure and how that pipeline works is really important before. But okay, now the breaking news has happened. What do you do? These are our tips for kind of how to handle immediate breaking news. And Sterling, I'll let you take this away.
Yeah, sure. So the first is to execute quickly. I know that seems like a little bit of a duh moment, but I'm all for work-life balance. I try to limit work time to work and play time to play. But there are just certain moments in news, in advocacy, where like, okay, this is a night that I'm just going to be on my computer and I'm going to make it happen, right? And you have to have dedicated staff members at your organization that are kind of willing to be that like rapid response team with you, so that you have to have that commitment to executing quickly if you really want to, get momentum on these moments. Again, that's why if you're judicious and you're not doing it all the time, it does not lead to burnout. Um, the other thing, and I'll show you a real world example of this on the next slide, but we actually or 2 slides, but show how you're going to respond. Even if you haven't done it yet, be in communication very, very quickly with your community to let them know that you are on it. You're on the case, right? Something is happening, and we're not just sitting twiddling our thumbs listening and watching the news, right? Like we're an organization that can have an impact on this issue that is happening, and we're going to do something about it. Make sure that you center people and narratives when you can. Levy all the channels that you have, of course, and then communicate frequently and keeping your sponsors updated throughout. So we're going to go through each of these. But this is our real world example here. So this is January 6th. So during the insurrection, my team and I are sitting around, on Slack, as I'm sure all of you were, like, wait, do you have the news on at your house? Do you see what's happening? What is going on? I mean, we're having those like visceral, emotional reactions, right? Like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? We didn't know what we Lawyers for Good Government were going to do immediately, but we did know we needed to respond, and let our community know that we were thinking and working on it. So the first thing we did was we wrote an emotionally evocative email. You can see the timestamp there. We sent it at 4:28 p.m. That day. So, not like while everything was happening at like 1:30 or 2, but like there's still people, so there's still mob people in the Capitol. It hadn't totally been cleared yet, but we started writing almost immediately. And the box that is highlighted, I think, is really important, which is, well, what comes before that is what I was talking about, like this emotionally evocation. We wanted to respond emotionally to our community so that they understand that this is bigger than just calling your representative. This is actually a groundbreaking history moment, and it's okay to be upset or sad or anything like that. Another example of that was the night that Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. We sent out this really beautifully written letter. I'm really proud of it, that I will say my executive director wrote most of. But it was just the perspective of a lawyer who cares about civil rights and human rights responding to the death of a giant in that field, right? It was not about the other stuff. In that moment, we thought our community needed the kind of ethos and the emotionally evocative space. And so that's what we focused on. So you see, we did a little bit of that here too, right? Because this was such a pivotal moment in our history. And then so the next, and then what we highlighted there was that we're working on it. We don't know yet what we're doing, but we are working on it, and we're going to get back to you very, very shortly. So this address it immediately and frequently. We actually emailed our supporters 3 times within a span of I think it was 3.5, 4 hours. So the next email, which is on the next slide, we sent, what is it? A little bit more than an hour later. A little bit more than an hour later, excuse me. And what we wanted to do was, we had made the decision we were going to be doing a lawyer-centric petition about the rule of law in this moment, right? That if somebody is inciting a mob for all of, et cetera, all of these reasons, we need to impeach Trump. He should be removed, he should be impeached, et cetera. We knew that like almost immediately. And so but we hadn't written it completely, right? Like that's hard to do in like an hour or 2 hours, right? Of grounded in the law, grounded in policy petition or letter that we're going to be sending to the cabinet and to the Senate about why he should be impeached. But what we can do is let our supporters know exactly what we're going to be doing. So you'll see the subject line here was time sensitive, will need your signature tonight. We were purposefully flagging for our community. Look, we told you in the last one we're working on it. This one is like a no, but really, and here's what it's going to be about. When you see the next email, that's the one you need to be taking action on. We apologized up front for the multiple emails. We also added in there, let's start funneling people to the next level of engagement, which is our rapid response text group. Excuse me, since we knew that's where we would get the most or more engagement than from email. So if you go to the next slide, about an hour and a half later, 7:24 p.m. Eastern, is when we actually were ready and we had our letter ready. So I want to like take a second and brag on my team for a little bit to think about what went into making that happen in such a short period of time. Writing a petition is not necessarily hard, but there's a lot that goes into all of it in real time and launching it, right? If you use Action Network, you have to set it up on Action Network. You have to set up the copy for the thank you, and you have to embed things on your website, right? Like there's a lot of different steps. And basically we had a team of 3 that were that's what we did from, 3 p.m. till 8 p.m. that night. We were just solely focused on that, and we were able to make it happen. I'll also mention, I think it's important, I thought this was a really smart trope that we did, but you'll see the subject line for the last email was, and maybe it doesn't show up here, but it was just a forward. It said forward of the time sensitive will need your signature tonight. So we had prepped them earlier, and then it was just like a forward of the thing from before. So I think that it worked well, both in that moment. Well, I know it worked well. But all of this was, because of what we did, we were likely one of the first, if not the first, petition that hit most of our supporters' inboxes, the same day that it was happening, saying Trump's got to go. Trump's got to go. Like, this is absolutely unconscionable and he needs to get out of here. They may have seen, I don't know whatever, I was busy. I literally don't know what other groups were doing at this time. But especially because, our community is legally focused and is focused on lawyers, ours was all about the Constitution and rule of law. And like, it was very clear, like articles, this says this, right? And so ours was very focused on like that piece of it. And so as a result, we ended up with the largest kind of sign-on letter in our history. We had over 10,000 people sign. And I also think because we were so quick to get out there, we also gathered the most amount of non-attorneys than we've ever had for one of our kind of actions. So it was super, super successful. It actually grew our email list from right around 40,000 to right around 50,000. We acquired almost 10,000 new email supporters as a direct result of that 5 hours of work, of just making it happen in the moment, the night of the insurrection. So Was it fun? No. Was it super impactful? And do I look back on it and I'm so glad we did it? 100%. So that's what we mean by addressing it immediately and frequently. Like, talk to your supporters throughout in the middle of those moments and say, we're going to be here and this is what we're going to do. Okay, now we're doing it. Here's the thing, right? Keep communicating throughout. Anything you'd add, Nick, to that story?
No, that's perfect. I just remember that day wondering, I'm sure you all are frantic over there, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna send an email to them seeing how they're doing tomorrow, because I'm sure
Yeah.
they're very, very busy. But it was awesome to see all this come in.
It was really cool. It was great. Yeah, we were working with Nick and Whole Whale at the time, and as data gurus, they were so pumped to show us like the big spike and like here's your website traffic and here's where it came from, and it was a really cool moment.
Yes, it was. You all did awesome work. And then, yeah, to the next point about centering people and narratives.
Yeah. So this isn't something you're going to be able to do for every action moment, right? So when you can, make sure you're telling a personal story to center people, because that's where you get evocative emotion. That's where you get, people. It's just a much better way to engage your supporters. So insurrection, not the best, easiest way to do that. So we didn't, right? Like, you're not going to be able to do all of the tactics on every tentpole major media moment, but you lean into as many of them as you can. Obviously, we did center people and the human interest story when we were trying to save Sonia's life, right? Like, here's another picture of Sonia, and there's actually a screenshot of our executive director, like with the call to action that I was talking about earlier. So when you can, definitely center people. Okay, so next slide. Oh, I think this is back to you.
Yes. Yeah. So, such amazing stories. And as we think of, okay, the event has happened, right? The dust has literally settled. You want to think more about how you use this moment to generate action. What are the long-term, actionable, impactful things that you can ask people to do that are going to make the difference in the long run? So when we talk about building momentum, this is something we've kind of touched on before, but Sterling, I wanted to highlight this. I think this is really important because this tweet here it's all about the action. There's how many actions here?
Yeah, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. I mean, we want to make it clear. Part of the reason why you want to give people a bunch of different actions, it's not just bifurcating, interests like we were talking about earlier and all of that, but it's also even if they're not doing anything but one of the 6, you're demonstrating value by showing, right? Like, there's 6 things that you can be a part of with our organization to actually make a difference on something, right? Even if one of the things is, retweeting, it's super low level, right? But it's something, and it is a concrete action that somebody can take. So it's just we have found, and I think we're going to talk about this in a little bit, that we get so much more engagement. We actually end up with more dollars when we have lots of different ways for people to engage. So,
yes, that's great advice for sure. Another example of, I think, amazing work is that when you're able to turn those things to do into real world impact. So maybe, Sterling, if you want to tell us about the awesomeness on this slide.
Yeah, so that Amy Coney Barrett opposition letter that I was talking about earlier, where we had over 6,200 attorneys signing it. It was the largest, actually it ended up with more after this, but it was the largest ever opposition letter from a group of attorneys against a Supreme Court nominee. We were able to, work with the Senate Democratic Judiciary Committee leaders to get it entered into congressional record. So Senator Durbin, when he was making his remarks about, this is why I'm voting no against Amy Coney Barrett, He was like, I also have this letter that is representing 6,200 attorneys, right? So we actually got to take a screenshot of the video and then send it out to our reporters being like, you did this, right? Like, it wasn't just a petition going into the ether. It actually made it into the congressional record that, like, these are the attorneys that, as we told them, are standing on the right side of history. And when we look back, and God forbid something, one of these challenges happens that we're afraid is going to happen on abortion rights, we opposed it for the right reasons, and we knew that there was a reason to be opposed here. The other thing I'll mention here is, it's also going back to the point about being judicious earlier about the types of actions you support and you try to get your supporters into. We only create actions that we believe will actually end up with a real world impact like this. We never create something that is going into the ether. So, for example, we have policy staffers that have relationships on the Hill that can effectively communicate when we have a large group opposing something or in favor of something, right? Without that, it's harder, or it would be a lot harder to have a real world impact, right? So we also really think about, like, our community and what are the issues that are uniquely suited for lawyers to be talking about in America. Of course, there are horrible injustices that are happening left and right, but what are the ones that, like, a group of lawyers standing up together and saying, no, will actually create an impact for? So we try to be really, really thoughtful, and that's why we don't create actions or tell our community to call their senators for every piece of legislation or for every, injustice that's happening, because, well, fatigue. We don't want them to get fatigued, but we also are just super judicious about where can we make a real impact, and we focus there.
Yeah, I think that's great advice as well. Really focusing on actions that matter, to put it frankly. Here's apologies, it ran away. Another thing I think that you all do really well is using social proof to build momentum. So social proof is just, kind of explaining how many people are joining your cause, your mission, your action, and then using that to then market it to other people, right? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the campaign that you all ran here.
Yeah, so this is a screenshot from our Amy Coney Barrett campaign, where we actually asked our community members to participate in the video that we were creating. So we partnered with Act TV, and community. We sent out a call to our supporters saying, we need you on camera reading this letter that we wrote in opposition to Amy Coney Barrett. And if you read it on camera, and send it to us, you may end up in the video that we're producing. So we ended up producing this really great video, and we worked with some Act TV to help promote it, and it got some really, really good traction on social. This was also in collaboration with Alliance for Justice. So it's just a really great way to show that, like, the actual human faces of the lawyers that are signed on to this letter, right? Like, I'm an actual person, and I'm saying the words out loud. I'm not just like a signatory, right? So it was a kind of, we're just trying to demonstrate, and I guess, what it really looks like, what social proof really is, right? Like it's a physical person in front of you that you want to join. So that was the purpose of this, and got really good traction with the video and all of that.
Absolutely. And even if, I think, before you all were able to produce this video, just the sheer volume of numbers, the number of signatories, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. So many people sign on, you're able to easily entice more people to sign on, right?
Exactly. Yep. So we use that in a lot of our kind of subsequent follow-ups. This many people, have already signed. Well, don't you want to join them?
I love it. It's a great, great technique. Excellent. So that's a lot of what happens kind of when it comes to activating people after an event. But even after that, you need to really understand that attention spans are short. And I think all of our attention spans are short, but especially when it comes to news cycles, they are shorter than they've ever been in history. This is a screenshot from a tool called Google Trends, which if you're not already familiar with, you should definitely familiarize yourself with it. It shows trends in Google searches over time on a 0 to 100 scale. So here we can see searches for Afghanistan in the United States on Google from October of last year to October of this year. And as you can see, of course, searches related to Afghanistan, with everything happening with the fall of Kabul occurring in late summer here, spiked, but that spike is remarkably short. It seems like it was the biggest news story on planet Earth, and it lasted exactly a week or 2 weeks, and that was it. And like now we're back at levels completely average with the rest of the year. The attention for what's happening in Afghanistan is over, and refugees, the resettlement's happening now. The problem hasn't gone away. The aftermath, all these different components are still in play. It's just that the attention has run out, quite frankly. So going back to that point of acting quickly, a lot of these real world events, you have a very limited time frame to generate action. So just something to be aware of. And speaking of data, we're going to get to nerd out for a sec, because one of the things that we love here at Whole Whale is reporting and building sustainable momentum. When all is said and done, looking back at the data and thinking how you can use what you did to inform what you are going to do in the future. So one of the tools that we love using is Google Analytics and Google Data Studio. And Google Analytics is like a data aggregation tool in a way. It's a reporting tool. It kind of houses all your web data if you have a website. And then Google Data Studio is a data visualization tool. So if you have a website, we highly recommend these two completely free tools to help you understand how people are interacting with your website. And tools like Google Data Studio can even integrate with your email client, whether you're using MailChimp, or there's lots of different data connectors, and it can be a really important way to kind of centralize and then pick out trends from the data, right? I'm sure, Sterling, you can attest to this. When you're sending out that email, you want to know if your email's being opened, if it's being read, people are clicking through or not.
Yeah, and Gmail and Apple Mail both are getting rough. Things are deliverability and opens and all of that are. I know that there's changes that have happened that make it harder, and so we try to stay up to date on some of those trends so that we can overcome them with how we send our emails. But it's something you have to stay on top of, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, and another thing is, if you're running a site, you can see with these tools how people are coming to your site. So something that we were able to help lawyers kind of ascertain was some of those partnerships or some of those articles, whether links were actually driving people to lawyers' site. And then we were able to see, are these people engaging with actions, that kind of thing. So it can be a really valuable tool. So again, completely free. We're unbiased, just great free tools for you to use to kind of measure your impact. You can also use tools to see where your supporters are coming from. You can integrate your web data with Google Maps. You get a little bit of demographic data. You can look at time frames of when people are coming, and this is a snapshot of traffic to your whole website. And You can see something happened in October.
Yeah. Might have been Amy Coney Barrett.
Might have been, yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
this is
if it showed January, it would have been even higher.
right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so this can be a really important tool, right, for knowing how people are engaging. And, there's a whole world of optimizing for conversions, landing page optimization, and tools like this help you get closer to figuring out what works or doesn't. And then lastly, the one thing I'll say, and I'll throw it back to you, Sterling, is just this data can help you better understand how to communicate. It helps you understand, who these people are, not even on the Google Analytics side, but if you have a CRM, whether you're using, Action Network or Every Action, you have a little bit of information about these people, what actions they're taking. You can send emails to different types of audiences. So this is all to say that there's a ton of data that you can use to help optimize your rapid response.
Yeah, and one of the ways we use this quite often actually is that a lot of times when we're doing a petition, in particular, we'll get attorney signers from like 48 states or 49 states, and we'll be like, that's not good enough. And so we're able to tailor specific asks to people that we know are attorneys and that live in a specific state. So that we can get, the South Dakota or the Nebraska or the whatever state it is that we didn't get through kind of more organic or kind of larger, more generalized, non-targeted asks. So that's always super, super helpful. And then, that last little point about how urgent requests can go to the segment of people most likely to take action. We had a really good example of that at the end of 2020. The Trump administration, in its waning days, decided to make this really important change to how you could apply for asylum that was basically going to make it impossible. And so what we realized is we have all this, in hundreds of clients that were already in our database that wanted to apply for asylum, but that were never going to be able to if these changes went into effect. And so we needed to get them matched up with pro bono volunteers immediately to see if we could actually get their final full applications in by a specific time. And we were able to do that by segmenting, right? By truly targeting the ask. Like we already knew from our big database of client management and through our email tools who's an attorney, who's a Spanish speaker, who did, right? So who's done one of these cases before. And it was super successful. We ended up filing and preserving 180 asylum claims at the very end of the Trump administration, which was really exciting. Before we move on, there was a question that we actually didn't get to talk about because I thought I was going to talk about it at one point. I didn't mention it. So I know we're kind of in the summary stage. So I just want to mention Facebook alternatives. At Lawyers for Good Government, we know that the long-term future for our organization is likely not going to be on Facebook for all the problematic reasons that Facebook is. We don't know what it will look like, but we did some pretty extensive research into a bunch of different platforms. There are fantastic ones out there. One that we almost use is called Circle, that looks great and I think is doing a really good job. Another is Honeycomb, also looked really good. But the one that we decided to use and that we're currently beta testing, we have about 70 users in it, is called Disciple. And the reason that we chose it is is completely white label, meaning that we will be able to create a Facebook-like experience on a mobile app and on a web app, right? Like a mobile web app, and on an iOS or Android app that is completely L4GG branded. No, right? And it's no ads, no crazy content. They're not going to be, our supporters aren't going to be competing with other groups for our attention when they're in our app. It's only about L4GG and the L4GG community. So we're beta testing that now. That's another example of us trying to get our most engaged supporters engaged, right? Is saying, hey, come help us beta test this, help us build this with us, right? And it's going pretty well. Basically, our plan is to help that drive our end of year kind of campaign and fundraising. and see how it goes. So I know that wasn't what the topic that we were talking about, but I wanted to be responsive to the question in the chat because we hadn't yet got to that. So feel free to look into Disciple. And I'll keep everyone posted about how it's going. And if you would like to beta test L4GG's Disciple app, let me know and I can send you an invite.
Yes, that sounds like a great opportunity. Thank you, Sterling. Yeah, and if you do have any other questions, feel free to drop them in. We have some guiding questions as we start getting to the summary brainstorming portion here. But yeah, feel free to drop in any other questions if you have them. So we're moving along. I think I skipped a slide. I did. So just to summarize this section, it's important to document, measure, and optimize each campaign so you can do better. And I'd say, Sterling, I think we kind of already touched upon this, but the kind of an interesting little insight that you all were able to pull out from the data.
Yeah, we actually found that to raise the most money from our email marketing platform, we actually need to include a volunteer ask. So our the emails perform 10 times better for our community, at least, when there is an opportunity to also volunteer. So what that, my assumption or working assumption is that lawyers in particular who know they have an ethical responsibility to do pro bono, when they get a request to volunteer and they can't do it because they're too busy or they don't, they don't have time, whatever, that I think they feel a little guilty. So they'll at least give money, right, to say that they help support the program. That's our working assumption, but we really lean into it. We try to never just email out an ask unless it's super, super urgent and it's very concrete and, for a very specific thing. Otherwise, we try to, we use this data and we move forward, and that may change, right? We may not have as good results, coming up this end of year campaign on this strategy, and then we'll use that data and we'll figure out something else.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. Great. So that concludes kind of the presentation portion. I know we have a couple minutes left. So we did just want to open up the floor to questions. So now is the time to drop those in the chat if you have them. And we do have just kind of a little bit of an interactive element, something that we want everyone who comes to this presentation to do is to actively think about this. Kind of the pillars of this is thinking about who are the first 50 people most likely to take an action, like we just talked about. When coming up with the strategy, also thinking about who on your team is responsible for each component of the response. So we remember to when Sterling was hard at work with her team, working on that rapid response strategy. There's so many different components that go into it. And when you're doing it under pressure, knowing how those roles are divided can really make a difference.
Ahead of time. Yeah. For one of them, I remember we just set up a three-way phone call and just stayed on the phone even while we were working, but it would have been much more efficient. So it was a blank phone call for a lot of the time, right? One person was working on the website, one person was working on copy. But it would have been much more efficient and less annoying if we had done this, which is figure out ahead of time who's going to be responsible for what.
That's a great advice. Co-working works.
Yeah. Remote too, but all works.
Yes, we do have a question. When you do get those first 50 people, or when you go to those first 50 people, do you feel like you need to involve them in the strategy you're formulating?
So that's a great question. Yes and no. So the way that we like to think about it is we like to make them think that they're being involved in the strategy, but we actually don't give them a ton of power to do so for a bunch of different reasons. Basically, we don't want to open ourselves up to a situation where you have someone who's really excited and engaged and they just have an idea that isn't tenable for your organization, right? So it's better to, offer two options that you're deciding between, or that you would be fine with either, right? Try to limit their. I'm a mother of a toddler, and like toddler parenting classes talk about this a lot, right? Like you decide the big choices, right? Like when your toddler goes to bed and what they're eating for dinner, they get to decide little things like what they're wearing for the day, or what toy they're taking to their crib, right? That's really, really, I'm not trying to downplay or the importance of your supporters, but or that their toddlers or treat them like that by any means. But that type of framework of thinking of like make them feel like they are invested in the strategy without necessarily leaving it so open-ended that they'll feel like they'll want to go with a strategy that isn't going to work for you. Yeah,
I would
that's
agree.
exactly right.
Yes.
Yeah. So Carolyn replied, "You don't want to risk getting bogged down," and I think that's exactly right. But you can definitely give the appearance that you're they're formulating strategy, or if you make opportunities to engage that are meant to be more behind the scenes, or create the feeling that they're behind the scenes. Like I said, this disciple platform, have made it clear this is beta testing, right? And so if something's a little wonky, that's okay, because they're beta testers. Where we're in the process of kind of like releasing bits and pieces of a 5-year impact report to people on that platform. And the idea is we'll get feedback along the way, like, oh, this piece of it worked really well, so we'll make sure we highlight that, right? That's the sort of way that you get the engagement and feedback.
Absolutely. We do have another question, and this one is, do you think every event needs a new ask, or should you channel the event momentum into an existing ask? Maybe depends on the situation.
Yeah, I would say it definitely depends on the situation. So, there's going to be situations where what you already have going is where you want to keep funneling people, right? Like, I'm trying to think of like a real world example, but like after the insurrection, when it was kind of clear that the Senate wasn't going to act, or there wasn't going to be a bipartisan commission. Like when these news moments were happening related to the insurrection, we kept funneling people back to that original petition. And we also had to think very critically about, when we were writing it, how to write it open-ended enough that it could kind of apply regardless of, it could also apply to future situations. So we purposely wrote it about, Trump deserves to be impeached and there needs to be a truth commission. So we kind of had like a multi-layer approach to the original petition. And then as different news events kept coming out, we could say, everyone who signed this thing earlier agreed that there needs to be a truth commission. You can also sign this thing. It's the same action, but you're signing on to the same message, but just like a different piece of it is highlighted today. But there are going to be situations where that's not possible, and you do need to create something new. Yeah, I hope that's helpful. But yeah, that's a tough determination. I would always err on the side of doing kind of less individual actions when possible.
Great. I agree with that. I totally agree. Yeah, I think we have time for probably one more question, based on all the different times I'm seeing in the platform. Yeah, there's some guiding questions here if any of these kind of inspire any questions, but we're happy. I'm also happy to provide my email. My email is Nick, Nick at wholewhale.com. So if you have any questions, you can email me directly if you're interested in reaching out, and love to chat more.
Yep. And mine is Sterling, Sterling, like my name, at l4gg.org. So, letter L, number 4, letter G.org. But it's been great. This is awesome.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah. So feel free to reach out if you have questions. So happy that we could be here. Thank you to Netroots and everyone for having us. And yeah, we really appreciate it. Well, I guess hang on for a minute or so if there's any last minute questions.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Make sure you plan.
Plan, nurture, build.
Exactly. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. It's been really great.
Thank you.